Hello, and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm your host, David Battistella. Ann Weiser Cornell was getting her PhD in linguistics at the University of Chicago when she met and studied with Eugene Gendlin, the originator of focusing, starting in 1972. Learning focusing with him has led to a lifelong process of discovery and personal development. In 1980, Eugene Gendlin invited Ann to assist with his focusing workshops. This started her on a path to become a focusing teacher, and in 1990, Ann became the first person to support herself full-time as a focusing teacher. Today, Ann is internationally recognized as one of the leading innovators of focusing. She's taught focusing in 18 countries, and her focusing books and manuals have been translated into 7 other languages. Ann is well known in the focusing world for her attention to the language that facilitates focusing, her popular manuals, and her co-creation with Barbara McGavin of Treasure Maps to the Soul, a body of work applying focusing to difficult areas such as addiction, depression, action blocks, self-criticism, and unfulfilled desire. She's the author of 2 books on focusing, her bestseller, The Power of Focusing, and The Radical Acceptance of Everything. Ann's newest book on focusing-oriented therapy is Focusing in Clinical Practice, The Essence of Change. Ann is authorized by the Focusing Institute in New York to offer the Institute's certification as focusing trainer. And now part 2 of our conversation with Ann Weiser Cornell. And you've touched on 2 really key things, stopped process, and earlier you talked about being identified with parts. And I was just wondering if you could just share a little bit about how much of an impact it has on a person's life when they are identified with a part of themselves, and that moment when they, in self and presence, realize that that is only a part of themselves and not fully, really, entirely them.
Yeah. Well, when we are identified with a part, we're not really free, because parts have a limited viewpoint. They only see partial aspects of a situation and can only react to partial aspects. And there's an inner war that emerges because other parts can see that the attempts to live, other parts can see that the first part's attempts to live are problematic. So they emerge trying to stop or solve the resulting problems. And then there's an inner war because, for instance, in an addictive pattern, something wants to do the action, whether it's drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, staying up late, playing computer games, whatever it might be. Something wants to do it and does it impulsively, indulgently, repetitively, and it seemingly in an out of control way. And there's another part of us quite worried about the situation, saying this is unhealthy, I'm not getting enough sleep, or I'm embarrassing myself, or whatever. But that other part doesn't have the power to stop it. And what was like for me when I was using alcohol addictively would be I would be sort of serially identified with one part or another. If I was identified with the part that wanted to drink, then I'd be out buying the wine for the day. And if I was identified with the part that was worried about that, I'd be full of shame. I'd be saying harsh things to myself, like, that's not a very enlightened thing to do. What if anybody knew you were doing this? And I didn't have any state in which I wasn't identified with one or the other of those parts.
Mm-hmm.
And to be disidentified means to turn toward all the parts that are there without getting caught up in the war, without trying to solve the problem, but to say to each one, okay, I know you're there. Yes, I know you're there too. And then that leads to curiosity. It leads to a process of inquiry in which something new can possibly happen. When we're identified with parts, those are repetitive states, and nothing new can happen. And then that itself leads to experiences of helplessness and even despair, certainly frustration, because there's a longing, there's a observation that something's really wrong, that this whole situation is a stuck situation. It's not leading to full life unfolding. But nobody inside the pattern, Barbara and I call it a tangle, nobody inside there can do anything about it. And so this ability to be self in presence, as we call it, to not be identified with any part, be the space in which the parts exist, is what makes all the difference. It's what allows, it's the atmosphere or the environment that allows the actual healing of the stuck situation to occur.
Can you describe that moment where those internal parts resolved for you while you were dealing with that particular tangle? Let's say it was alcoholism, and what the bodily feeling was, and what you felt when you knew the moment of discovery. Do you remember it?
Well, I'll do my best. I don't know. Well, let's try. What was odd about working with the part that wanted to drink is that it didn't give me a strong bodily feeling at first. First of all, I had already quit drinking, at least temporarily, because of a series of spiritual experiences. Mm-hmm. And then, which resulted in me facing that I had been drinking alcohol addictively, which brought a lot of shame. So I would say at this time, when I was doing focusing on it, which was right after it happened, right after the realization happened that I'd been using alcohol addictively, and therefore I needed to stop, I was mostly feeling shame. But I had the idea, and I think I was right, that a real pivot was the part that still wanted to drink. Mm. And yet I didn't feel that in a bodily way. And one of the revelations, really, that Barbara and I made at that time was that you can actually invite and work with something that you don't feel at the time you invite it. Previously, in the focusing we'd done before then, we felt focusing is being with something that you feel in your body. We'd never heard of, from anyone else, we'd never heard of the idea of working with something that you didn't yet feel. But I knew such a part existed. There is a part of me that wants to drink. I knew that if I didn't somehow deal with it, then eventually it was going to have its way again. And so I had a series of sessions where I gave it a kind of open invitation, like I just would, wherever you are, I don't feel you right now, but I know you're there somewhere. I would really like to get to know you better. I remember one session where that part told me, how good Chardonnay tastes. It just really loved the taste, and it really loved that feeling of everything getting kind of fuzzy and the world slipping away. And when I say it told me that, I don't mean that I heard voices inside, but it was more like an inner revealing through memories and images. Oh, yeah, like, oh, no wonder it wants me to have that kind of pleasure, as it called it. But then I had another session where I said, okay, I'd love to get to know what you really want. Like, sure, yeah, I mean, I did hear all the things about how good it tastes. What else, right? What are you wanting me to experience? What do you want? What do you hope will happen? What do you hope you're doing for me by doing those, by drinking, by bringing me to drink? And just really waiting and feeling into that. And again, getting images, memories, that when they would click, there would be a little in the body. But it was never a strong body feeling. It was more like memories of how, when drunk, I would sometimes sing or read poetry or dance or be very spontaneous or joke easily with the people around me or flirt easily with the people around me. And another part of me kind of horrified by that. But this part of me wanting that from me, wanting a kind of relaxation and ease and spontaneity and sensuality and creativity, and then taking in that answer and really sensing in my body the feeling of both wanting that and something in me shocked or terrified really, by the prospect of being relaxed, creative, spontaneous, and sensual without having some excuse. Being able to say, oh, it was, and that became a whole further exploration of that other side, the side of me that was terrified, setting a boundary against allowing spontaneity more fully into my life. So that the boundary then had to be knocked down by the drinking. Now, another person working with an addiction might get a whole different set of things. So it's not specifically about the spontaneity. But we learned, and Barbara and I learned, and she was trying this with some issues of her own. What if we ask the part doing the behavior what it wants, what it wants for us from doing the behavior? And we got wonderful results from this. We started asking smokers who wanted to quit smoking. We started suggesting to them, you might ask the part that smokes what it wants for you. And everybody could get that. At one, but they were fascinatingly different and also paradoxical. Like, I remember one smoker said, it wants me to have my own breath. And if you think about that logically, it doesn't make any sense, but that's the answer it had. Another one said, it wants me to have my own space. And that kind of makes more sense. But then we noticed, and this is absolutely fabulous, that once that part had answered a question like that, it became less urgent and eventually would fade. There are many issues involved in addiction, and sometimes it wasn't that simple. But often it was certainly a big step toward a new relationship with whatever the activity or substance is, when you can hear from it what it's wanting you to experience. So that's what I'd say.
And those producing those kind of internal shifts that take your life often in a whole new direction, because there are a whole new sense of possibilities and a whole new way to carry forward with that new information or new wisdom that's sort of born out of this internal work.
And what I think is really important there is that we don't know in advance what those new possibilities will be.
Right. We just end up experiencing this new place, which all of a sudden we're in a new situation because of the change that has occurred, or the shift or the movement, or
and it's serendipities. For instance, 2 months after this circumstance of working with the drinking issue, I was invited by a publisher to write my first book.
Mm.
And up till then, I'd been struggling. I'd been tearing my hair out, trying to reach people who might publish a book for me. This was like they called me.
Wow.
So who knows what those interconnections were, but it's been always my experience, myself and others, when these locked-in places open up, many new possibilities open that we can't even predict in advance.
Mm. I can only sort of, the amount that you're sharing personally is amazing, for your own personal experiences, and not only your experiences, but your process. But you've also been in this position, and I've experienced this, of sort of privilege of being present when someone else's process, and we don't even comment on it really. We would never comment on it to the other person, but we, as focusers, understand when someone's had that kind of experience. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of changes you've witnessed with people because or while they were focusing, or because of focusing?
I can't be specific, not just because of confidentiality, but because I don't have the kind of memory that keeps a hold of things like that. But I have seen this kind of change over and over again. It's beautiful. The people who feel stuck and hopeless about something in their life changing, often, no guarantees, but often that opens and begins to move, and there's a sense of freedom and possibility, and something begins to happen that couldn't happen before. And it's such a privilege and a pleasure to be part of that, right? To accompany people and be some part of that kind of shift happening. And that kind of shift is natural, right? It's what I like to say that if you cut your finger, it's not surprising that it heals. It knows how to heal. All you need to do is kind of wash the dirt out of it and leave it alone. And the same thing is really true of our emotional life. We need to give a kind of environment of awareness. And that's about all.
I often say when you cut your finger, our greatest technology is a Band-Aid. Yet
Yes.
all of the other processes that take place to make that thing invisible, without your knowing, is kind of the miracle of our own body, and the natural sort of processes and wisdom and things that it will go ahead and do. And sometimes we are fantastic at getting in the way of that in our internal space.
And that's, I think, why the technology, if you want to say it that way, of emotional change lags so far behind all of our other technological advances. You know, we can hold the wisdom and intelligence and information of the whole world in our hand, in a little device we can also use to call people up and see their faces, but we don't know how to handle our angry outbursts that in some cases result in people getting killed. So I have a commitment to seeing that change in my lifetime, that we begin to understand what we need to do so that we're not controlling our emotions, but we're turning toward our emotional states so that we're more than our automatic reactive states. We also have that compassionate, wise, larger self, both toward ourselves and to others.
That's just a beautiful image to consider and to think about. And I just wanted to ask one more thing, because you've sort of been around focusing for such a long time, and so many more people are becoming involved with it and teaching it and applying it in other specific processes. But what's it been like for you to watch the evolution of focusing?
I am glad there's more people now than there were. On the other hand, I still see focusing as a well-kept secret. In other words, we don't intend focusing to be secret, but I really wish many more people knew about it. So we haven't had our 100th monkey threshold. We haven't crossed that border where enough people know about it that it has its own momentum. That's also something I'd like to see in my lifetime.
Me too. That's something I'm really committed to as well.
Great. Very good.
I want as many people to know about presence language and turning toward and being with the parts of us in, to use your term, a radical and accepting way.
And David, in my lifetime already, I've seen that happen with yoga and meditation.
Yeah.
So I would like to see focusing take that same step of being something people know about, know is available, and it becomes part of a vocabulary that is people learn in school, or doctors say, you might want to try this if you're stressed. So that's my wish.
I think that's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment for us to close our conversation today, unless, of course, there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, thanks. That sounds very, it seems very complete, and thank you so much for your thoughtful questions.
I would like to thank you very much, not only for being such a magnificent mentor and teacher, but for taking the time to participate in this, my work with focusing, trying to do my part to bring it to as many people's ears as I can. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Focusing Way podcast, available on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. Also check out our website at thefocusingway.com.